Well, I'd like to thank Jan for having organized this event. Fantastic convergence. Different vantages. We need this congregation of opposites on this particular topic. I'm coming from the art world, really, multi-generational art family, quite famous in Europe in sculpture and painting. The semantic art is one aspect of our work. Semantic art, what's that? It takes multiple fields of information, Egyptology to modern physics, to the Rig Veda, to sacred geometry, to multidimensional theories, to mathematical number systems, to art. I'm also a musicologist and the founder of the 432 Hertz modern popular movement of music, based on the old French pitch, which is also based on harmonic numbers that you find in the various mythologies and architectures of the world. As an eschatological thinker, we were propelled into the ultimate or utmost sphere by two near-death experiences when we were 11 and 15. The second near-death experience also activated the UFO. My story is extensive. I've been 33 years in the public working with the UFO field and many other different fields. So there is absolutely no time to go into my story per se. The only thing that was a little bit of an irritant in the oyster shell over time was, sure, I could bring people to see the UFO when it was in a wave, because this happens in waves. As a teenager, it was very regular, almost daily. Then in my 20s, I was left to my own devices with strong backup. Today, I hardly see the phenomenon, except when we engage dialogues with the cosmos. Dialogues with the Cosmos is what we will be looking at today a bit. It is a European effort where civilian units are engaged to bring in a UFO through coherent protocols. Coherent protocols that are measurable by biofeedback, and the biofeedback methodologies are utilized. Those coherent biofeedback technologies practiced as the objective is then utilized in the high mountain sites to summon the UFO. We call this a form of new art emerging in humanity. We are non-dogmatic. We're going to speak in certainties. It's our style. When we say it is, you can just say, well, yeah, maybe. We have a lot of experience directly with the UFO. For us, there is no doubt of the reality of an intelligence behind and through the UFO. Our understanding of what it is today is very different to when I started going through the experience during my teens on a regular basis. Today I've had a lot of time to go through the human meditation process of what is going on, and it makes you review everything, every aspect of reality. Now, it's interesting with skepticism. I believe in skepticism, healthy skepticism. You've got the societies for the claims of the paranormal made by James Randi in England, who will give you £1 million if you find one paranormal person or one paranormal event. No one's claimed the cash. Then there is the Society for the Claims of the Normal in the USA. If you can find one normal person and one normal or average sunset, you get $1 million. No one's claimed the cash. So what is reality? And this is where the UFO pushes the envelope. It's one of the main steerers in our day and age. So our experience in bringing units to fieldwork, to engage protocols, to measure, to take various forms of measurements, we call a new form of art. And for many of the dialoguers, it will continue for a while until they push to the edge of fear. That often happens. We call this the dawning of the age of the art of cosmic dialogue,
by the artist of consciousness. I'm a member of the board of directors of the New York New Observations Art and Culture magazine. And we're bringing out the artists, the famous artists. New Observations was created by Lucio Pozzi 33 years ago to propagate art, culture, ecology, but also the deeper worlds. Now a lot of artists are coming out of the woodwork. Art is an interface for this subject. So in this concept, the environment is the canvas. The artist is consciousness. The protocols that are utilized with clear, coherent intent, coherent cardio rhythms are the brush strokes. This interfaces with other consciousness that emerges in the canvas, which is the environment, and which is measurable as well. So we train the units who all want to see the UFO intelligences and don't want to pay attention to the details. Look at the directions. There's going to be 2 time trackers who are going to say what time it is. And if it's too spectacular, the event, then we estimate, as soon as we've got a bit of time, we say between this time and that time, let's say 10 minutes. So you've got a rough estimation. One of the most important tools is the satellite trackers. Whilst it's true that when you have something moving in the sky, this can instigate for some people other phenomenon, we're being more down to earth. So we are specifically pre-checking satellites and using different satellite measuring systems and applications. That's vitally important. When you have a moving light in the sky, however, maybe at a high magnitude satellite level, one utilizes the protocol, focuses, and see if it responds. And we have had quite clear responses. So we're from a multi-generational art family. My grandfather in the Swiss Alps became a sculptor when a golden light came over him. Something that would happen to me 46 years ago, when I was 2.5 years. My mother, here I am in his atelier. So he became a sculptor when a golden light in the Swiss Alps engulfed him, and he woke up having made a human head out of the snow near the area of Sion. My mother, renowned in Europe for her artwork, was to experience the UFO with me. It's a long story, but I showed her the UFO, and she saw the landings, she saw the communications, etc. She painted UFOs as a result. When I was 17, I was having almost daily experiences, but there are many different levels of experience that occur. There would be physical lights in the sky that would move and then park above me, entrain my body, and I would have a tingling through all my cells, which is quite typical. A lot of people know this and have experienced this. And then I would be told to go inside, and I would experience something I used to call ETI-VR, extratemporal intelligence virtual reality, where you have a somatic experience with the 5 senses, where you're traveling out of the body, but this is not an out-of-body experience. I did plenty of that as well for another period. This ETVR experience, you're guided to places like the moon, the moons of Jupiter, and other places. We also receive tons of information. And then 7 years in, we took that information and we also kind of rebelled, say, wait a minute, we want to question everything, absolutely everything. What is going on here? Because some of the information was too much. And so I went into my researcher phase, which is what gave birth to the semantic artist. The semantic artist has a canvas, which would be the multimedia, has sentences as brushstrokes with various concepts that build a montage, that build the final painting. That's how we work through many, many, many different fields and subjects. With dialogues with the cosmos, we have one semantic art palette to play with.
So first contact that I remember vividly because of chocolate is high up in the Swiss Alps. It's about 3,000 meters at the Verpekle Glacier. A couple of years ago, we took a dialogues team there and had some good results. We're going to look at the film of that. My mother was painting the trees in this area, and I was sitting by a pond, pondering on the pond. And as I was pondering on the pond, a golden sphere came next to me. Then the sphere engulfed me. It's very difficult to remember, but what I remember was cascades of infinite vacuum, which has happened numerous times with regards to the UFO. I emerge, and I'm drawing lemniscates in the sand and announce myself to the search party head, Michel, who's been looking for hours for me. So my mother had to go down the village because her 2 years and 6-month-old child had vanished in the wilderness of Switzerland in the high Alps. Search party assembled, and they were looking for me for hours. That was not my experience of the vacuum emptiness. I remember it particularly well because Jean-Luc got a full Swiss chocolate bar, and I'd never had a Swiss chocolate bar. And we know the year because the paintings she made are signed 72. So the work has been taking place in the high Alps of Switzerland, Austria, Italy, Mount Etna, and Norway in earlier times. Many different types of witnesses are present. You have lieutenants, you have physicists, you have aeronautical engineers, but you also have artists, you have New Agers, you have all kinds of different broad spectrum people. We try to do this non-dogmatically. We're not interested in the UFO sect or cult aspect. It's a big problem in the UFO field. But we try to engage the ultimate intent of coherence in interfacing with the unidentified aerial phenomena intelligence and to gather data, signal intelligence. And we gather wide varieties of signal intelligence. So a way to look at this for us is a new creative faculty is awakening in mankind, some human beings. This may take thousands of years, but it will become a regular reflex for some to go out in the mountains or out in nature, look at the stars, and engage the creativity of the UFO encounter. Certainly, the most creative brain states and heart states, according to the research and studies of the Heart Math Institute, is a cycle of about 8 cycles per second, which is also the frequency detected by the Hessdalen Research Association in Norway, analyzing the UFOs that manifest there, with 5 different countries having their scientists research it over time. Professor Erling Strand told me that a cycle of about 8 cycles per second appears before the UFO is recorded and is measured. This is the maximum creativity in the artist, in the poet, in the one doing Tai Chi. So environment is the canvas, the artists are consciousness, and Earthside plus the other UFO are part of the interactive art, a creative new faculty. We're allowed to do that. Art is eccentric at times. The ultra-terrestrial hypothesis is not our hypothesis. We think it has elegant aspects, but much more is going on. I can't get into that now, but perhaps with Jan we will go into what we think is going on. With the idea of ultra-terrestrial, you have many different forms of possibilities. This includes the interdimensional hypothesis of Jacques Vallée. It also includes other realities, dimensions, parallel universes that coexist. And it also may include the time-traveling elements. So our great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren time-traveling back.
ultra-terrestrial is not enough. The reality rethinking that occurs through the UFO experience and many other fields. We had the fake news of UFO. We have the fake news of politics. We've done a series called Macro Revelations for a Fake Reality, where we examine every field and every assumption, certain histories, certain books, things that we take as God-given, and look to ask the question, is this real? Where's the fakeness? And we show the fakeness. You have it in astronomy. You have it in physics. True objectivity has never been gained in the old physics, like quantum mechanics, as we mentioned earlier today. So the idea of the ultra-terrestrial widens the extraterrestrial hypothesis a bit. The simulation theories that are now emerging, reality is a computer simulation, and we're starting to simulate molecules. We'll move to cells in our computational work, and eventually, 500 years, 1,000 years, we can start to simulate whole human beings, whole environments, whole planets. And in a whole planet with human beings, 20% can be simulators that can be simulating their simulated world. And if you take that forwards, 500,000, 5,000 years, at some point, reality and the simulation are going to be indivisible. And based on those ideas and projections from past computational exponential increase by Moore's law and more, to the future, it's likely that our great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren are going to be simulating reality, and maybe this is even interfacing with that simulation, where the mouse cursor on the screen could be, for instance, the UFO. I mentioned earlier this morning, and I think it remains important, the press conference that was made on September 28th of 2010, where you had 120 signed affidavits of high-level military officers who were working with the launch facilities and the ICBM's international intercontinental missile systems, ballistic missiles, where UFOs would engage the base and turn off nuclear missiles, in some cases turn them on and then turn them off in different countries. The UFO and the atomic have been indivisibly co-present. There's now, Robert Hastings now has 150 witnesses with these credentials. So these are very clear, credible witnesses and witness testimonies. The UFO appears not only in the night, but during the day. NASA has also admitted that the space shuttle Atlantis, for example, couldn't land because these spheres were in the sky, and so there was a delay. We don't know what they are. They just happen to come here and there. We don't know where they come from. But that was an admission in 2006. For 300 years, astronomers have been observing and reporting UFOs leaving Mars and Venus, crossing the sun. There are many cases. In 1992, I wrote a fat book, 684 pages, called The Alien Presence, which catalogued a lot of those and many other military testimonies. I gave a press conference in Copenhagen on January 1991 to 75 journalists called The Alien Presence, JFK and the Alien Presence. So at that point, we were still in that paradigm. Nevertheless, there is plenty of records that for 300 years, astronomers have seen these objects leaving Mars, Venus, the Moon, crossing the Sun. This is from 1896, French astronomer seeing an object by the Sun, kind of heralding the age of dialogue. I think the age of dialogue is a natural, artistic, embedded process, which was pioneered in modern times by Canada, Wilbert B. Smith from the Department of Transport was engaged into the Project Magnet, which was Canada's own UFO research official system. He was particularly interested in communicating with the intelligences. The famous Smith Memorandum from 1950, which states, of course, after a meeting in Washington with top US military personnel who were in on the mystery of the flying saucers, as they were called then, by Kenneth Arnold, says that flying saucers exist. They are classified higher than the H-bomb, which is the highest classification that existed at that time, and their modus operandi is unknown, and they are being studied by a small group headed by Vannevar Bush. Also, certain mental phenomena was being explored in how they operated. In fact, Wilbert B. Smith went deep into mental phenomena. There was radio contact with a being who called itself Afa, which, if you look in history, you find it is a word in Enochian, from Dr. John Dee, who created the Royal Society and who was Queen Elizabeth's cryptographer, and was dabbling with all kinds of different worlds. There was ham radio contact. There was tensor beam contact, an entraining beam that would convey the same information. Wilbert B. Smith himself, who was a master of technology, of communication technology. During World War II, he made big antenna systems. So he was one of the chief communication experts at that time. So a great man for Canada. Was interested in communication technology, was his field. So he used, in the end, dreams to make his technologies. Dreams from AFA. And he would actually fine-tune his devices. He also contacted many contactees. He gave a questionnaire out through the US and Canada and all over the world, and when the items were correctly filled in, he knew he had the genuine deal. Amidst those was George Van Tassel and even George Adamski, whatever you may think of him. But more importantly, there was his main contact was Dr. Arthur Matthews, who was the protege of Nikola Tesla, who confirmed the information on a so-called physical level. Matthews' description of the ship is like a living entity. It had horticultural domains. The walls were living cybernetic systems. He could look at them and he was immediately entrained into the cybernetic environment like a virtual reality. And this was descriptions from the 1940s. And this was published in the Ottawa Science Journals. I got a copy in my early research of some of those. There was, of course, Francis Swan was one of his communicators with AFA. So the US Navy document of Knowles talks about the AFA affair. The age of dialogue is to engage cosmic intelligence in communication and get something perhaps valuable. Technology was being explored by Wilbert B. Smith in terms of the information exchange. There is a CERN physicist, Dr. Beatrice Gato-Vera, who has introduced a new concept to deal with the Fermi paradox, which is the subanthropic principle. The subanthropic principle engages the idea of the strong anthropic principle, which is an observer-orientated universe. There's no universe unless there is an observer to observe it. There is the weak anthropic principle too, but it doesn't hold this logistics. We really need to keep logistics alive. Logic is vital in these fields. And that also means admitting error, discovering error, and correcting it. And also taking macro views of certain areas without saying this is dogmatic truth, not getting caught in the macro either. So the strong
anthropic principle taken into the subanthropic principle goes this way. Astronomers are seeing the beginning of the universe, more or less, like 11 billion, 12 billion years ago, if you believe in the Big Bang theory and an expanding universe. There is good evidence that can argue against that as well, like the Society for the Claims of the Normal and the Society of the Claims of the Paranormal. There are great contrasts, and these are important to always keep in mind. Certainly for me, the experiences with the UFO intelligences, ultra-terrestrial, hyperterrestrials, extratemporal intelligences, whatever they are living consciousness beings, they are real, but they make one question everything completely. The experiences, the human digestion of the experiences. The human part is extremely important, the human meditation of cosmic disclosure. So in the subanthropic principle, there must have been observers 11 billion years ago, 12 billion years ago. How did they get there? Lots of theories could be put out there. They're time travelers. They're using multiple dimensions. This is a simulation, etc. But they were there to observe the universe because we see it. So they've had a lot of time to do genetic engineering, every form of genetic engineering, stem cell engineering, computer sciences. Look at the 100 years where we've got with computer sciences. We're simulating molecules. And soon we'll be able to simulate a body or a primitive organism at the least. We're getting closer and closer to that point of view. So billions of years to develop this. Sir Francis Crick, discoverer of DNA, double helix, said in a book in 1975 that if you look at chance, random selection, there's not enough time for the complexity and diversity of life here. The only explanation for him was not panspermia, that an asteroid brings life here, not enough time. Can only be an intelligently controlled probe that is releasing the best of genetic specimens. So a designer world, in his point of view, not necessarily mine at all, but it's a stepping stone. In the subanthropic principle, therefore, the best engineering has already been done, reality synthesis has already been done, time and space travel has been done. You've had billions of years to do it. And you make designer worlds, like our planet. The position of the sun and the moon, in particular, stand out. You take the equatorial circumference of the moon 108 times, and you have the distance to Earth in the mean of its elliptical orbit. If you take the heart of the sun, the equatorial circumference of the sun 108 times, in the mean of the elliptical orbit of the Earth around the sun, you have the distance to Earth. These are no coincidences. The moon rotates over 27 days. Recent NASA analysis of the heliosphere finds that the equatorial circumference is also rotating over 27 days. So you have this synchronization, 27, 54, 54 times 208. So you get this numerical, geometrical, because 54 and 108 are pentagon angles, so they have golden mean significance, and the golden mean is a transient harmonic foundation of our universe. It never ends. So we have this impossible situation where without the moon there would not be seasons, there wouldn't be tides, the flow of water, the correct magnetic field to support the bacterias that enable advanced life. Without the sun, also no life, because we have no light. They both can be taken 108 times from their equatorial circumference to Earth. That sounds artificial. In the subanthropic principle, the super civilizations that would be space and time traveling and would also be dimensional traveling, there are different concepts of dimensions, and hyper civilizations of this CERN physicist's idea. The hyper civilizations have engineered them into higher brain, B-R-A-N-E, worlds, where they can exist as pure light, pure information. They can reach speed of light, singularity, etc. These super and hyper civilizations put themselves into stealth mode. They make themselves invisible, but they bury in the laws of physics They bury in all different fields of information in our world clues. That's the subanthropic principle. We are naked in that super civilization according to the subanthropic principle. It's a very appealing idea. For those of you who may not have had a significant UFO experience. Now, President Trump, in his inauguration speech, spoke about
our country will thrive and prosper again. We stand at the birth of a new millennium, ready to unlock the mysteries of space, to free the earth from the miseries of disease, and to harness the energies, industries, and technologies of tomorrow. A new national pride will stir our souls, lift our sights, and heal our divisions.
I spoke about the creation of new technologies and space explorations. His uncle, Dr. John Trump, was raising him as a teenager and as a child even, and warning him significantly on the dangers of nuclear and chemical weapons. He was also working under Vannevar Bush, the guy who was studying UFOs, according to the Project Magnet memorandum of Smith, the Canadian head of the UFO research, governmental UFO research of Canada, who worked with Dr. Arthur Matthews. Dr. Arthur Matthews has 80 patents behind him. This is an old picture of him. He's now gone quite a while. And Dr. John Trump was fascinated by the work of Dr. Nikola Tesla. In fact, he was assigned to receive all of the arcane writings of Dr. Tesla. He was fascinated by the vacuum tube technology because he'd been involved in old electronics. Dr. Matthews was specifically recreating the vacuum tube technology that Tesla made and utilized in 1903 to, he said, in public, receive messages from Mars and Venus. He introduced Dr. Matthews in 1942 to the UFO intelligences. With this device, Matthews was able to pick up communication. It was fairly large, telescope, and have a contact. The intelligences that emerged were clearly fresh. Like many experiences with the so-called Nordic class, it looks like they are fresh, that they are spatialized out of fresh stem cells. So often even the lips are still blue, have not been fully flooded through with blood, and no fingerprints, no lines on the hands. The super or hyper-civilization will have perfected billions of years ago already stem cell technology and then stem cell cybernetics, which would enable rapid biochemical spatialization of a body form for any particular local environment. So they had perfect symmetry on both sides. The ship had a central pillar, and in the 50s, I think it was 1957, after the first Sputnik was put up, Wilbert B. Smith got to see, by arrangement through Dr. Matthews, this ship with a blue series of spinning laser-like lights around it. Matthews said that there were 4 pilots in the middle that were tuning their bodies to the cosmic intelligence, the anthropic principle, or the anthropos of the various fields of studies. Anthropos doesn't root back to the Gnostics or the Egyptians. It roots back not just to the Persians, but to the most archaic Sarasvati River Valley culture, which has 14,000-year-old cities like in Mirgara. I visit one in 2004 in Kalibangan, which was 8,000 years old, fully developed with bricks, sewage systems, water systems, and all 88 constellations. And the Sanskrit alphabet transcribed to the pictograms, the 50 letters to the pictograms that they use. This is the root of the idea of a godhead, or anthropos, the root of the idea of the cosmic Christ, or mega point of Teilhard de Chardin, and other eschatologists' exploration therein. So the root describes a cosmic intelligence. It describes also, furthermore, that the Rig Veda, the oldest manuscript of mankind, has non-human authorship. So the Anukramanas, the appendixes of the Rig Veda, describes the various non-human families and authors that write it. So this is the genesis of history. You have the 88 constellations. You've got descriptions of the atoms. You've got a description of the speed of light, 4,440 yojana and half a nimesa is the description in Mandala 2 of the Rig Veda. You've got a description of two world halves, so the earth is round. You've got Bhuja, who is taken by a flying vehicle, who is on the edge of death and is resurrected and is taken up into space by the Asvina twins, which are numinous beings in the Rig Veda, and describes the two world halves and going around the world. And then he describes 3,600 years being warped at the same time, and then 10,800 years, and then myriads of these, becoming the Abhavam, or the ocean of the boundless depth, as a vacuum infinity. And then the reversing of that, and the ship takes him into the mountains, and out through the mountains, and he's born again. So you have plenty of those stories. You have Varuna, who takes the initiate through his ship to the city of ships, which is enormous. Now, with Dr. Arthur Matthews, who called this ship the X-12, he describes that the beings say they come 3,969 years from the future. So this would be a future Venus that has been terraformed with picotech or femtotech. I know scientists today in hadronic mechanics that are working with femtotech. Picotech, in that sense, is outdated. Nanotech is certainly way gone. It's interesting and useful in many applications. So this leads more to the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis. So this is Dr. John Trump with the Tesla technology. Here he is with a young Trump. He was meeting with Nikola Tesla here. He absorbs all of the patents, including the advanced vacuum systems. At the end of his life, Dr. John Trump was working on a Tesla-based time machine, 1984, 1985, as well as a device that would heal all different kinds of illnesses. Now, in the testimony of William F. Hamilton, in 1952, mass dialogues began as tens of thousands of 10,000 people or so would go to the giant rock base of George Van Tassel. And during the summer congresses would summon UFOs, which came. There was no satellites in those days. So Sputnik was 1957. 1952, 1954, 1955, 1956, 10,000 people getting used to these objects of moving light. You aim at them with a torch, they shift direction. You aim them with the car lights, which they got used to taking out of the car and actually assembling systems to flash at them, and they would jump, zigzag, etc. This is what we've been experiencing with dialogues with the cosmos. And we call this an alphabet. I'm just going to skip over that slide and go back to it. So we believe there is an interactive cybernetic alphabet where consciousness appears to affect the UAP, the unidentified flying phenomenon. You're aiming with the laser of coherence, that is a compassionate heart when you measure it in biofeedback, and willed intent, consciousness harnessing biological coherence and focusing it like a laser at the object. Does it respond? One response is it goes zigzag. Another is it brightens up and powers down. Name Power Up from James Gilliland. Pulse flashes. With your heart or with a laser in earlier times, it will respond to the number of flashes. And this is quite impressive in that sense when you do it with the heart and not with a physical laser. Intent with the heart, and you get 3 responses exactly after you're aiming it and focusing it. It may arc in an arched trajectory as an alphabet letter, or it jumps in response to the coherent willed intent laser, or jumps and flashes. There was several experiences where it seemed the experience was that it was time traveling, that you're watching time travel in the jump. You're seeing everything in between occurring. Everybody has that sensation when it occurs. And then combinations of those. There is a whole alphabet of interactivity. But every dialogue with the cosmos has been different. And of course, we get better and better at charting the territory. So everyone learns directions, one learns the constellations, atmospheric conditions, and these kind of things. We also use other forms of input, which includes the Einstein imaging technique. The Einstein imaging technique, developed by Einstein. Einstein didn't believe in the small window of radio astronomy. The advanced civilizations, should they be there, would use something more akin to consciousness. Einstein held 2 stones, and would join or fuse his senses together. His 5 senses, and he would imagine he was having contact with this extraterrestrial or ultra-terrestrial intelligence to formulate some of his visionary moments. Einstein imaging or image streaming was further developed by Dr. Charles Reinhardt, professor of physics at the Department of Chemistry Physics at Southwestern State University, Marshall, Minnesota. He was able to train from 30 mentally handicapped patients, 17 of these patients got the technique together. They were able to visualize, smell, hear, taste, feel, use the 5 senses to sense somatically the extraterrestrial environment, and would ask for scientific information. He would measure with electroencephalogram the brainwave activity, and found that as the image streaming was taking place, all 8 poles of the brain would be linked at 8 cycles per second, which is the alpha hemisync frequency of the both hemispheres of the brain coming into synchrony to the pineal gland and the development of melatonin and phenylalanine, and maximum creativity. Here, all 8 poles of the brain are linked, not just 2 hemispheres. They also have to speak, and this happens when they speak, when they channel what they experience. You suspend critical thinking when you do this phase. Afterwards, you do the critical analysis. We do the same in the dialogues with the cosmos fieldwork. I believe this is the future for all the different stargazing groups. There's many who are saying, look, that great, fantastic UFO, and no one's measuring, are there any satellites there? You need to have those different documentary parameters. And we've used this year some new equipment, which is very exciting, and which I have to get to. So the patents that were received by all 17 mentally handicapped patients passed the US Patents Office as working devices. So the 17 patents received by Einstein imaging channeling from ET, the physicists of the US patent offices said these are working devices. So it works. And this is the 8 Hertz principle. And we utilize this Einstein imaging as one signal line. So there are those who choose for that night field work to specialize in recording such input. Others may have been trained in various different branches of remote viewing. They will take a signal line. We take background radiation signal line. We take atmospheric information signal line. We take the Tesla bot. We also take sound measurements. There's a lot of data here to go through. So we had very successful results. Some of it's on film. But just before I get to that, I want to show this year's work. So the field work is, of course, during the night between 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock in the summer. Then in the day, we do the debriefings. This is where you get really valuable information. So people are sharing everything they've experienced, what they've seen. Everything is recorded, so we've got a record of it, and we've got everything recorded from the night, both video and audio, and other measurements. So then we correlate. And it's very interesting, the kind of information that emerges, the additional details and how they synchronize. This is information, this is signal, raw data. We don't claim that this is evidence for ET. It just appears that the protocols we utilized, the phenomenon that emerged, is consciously interacting. But we're calling it a new form of art. In the last one this summer, in July, there was a new phenomena that emerged, which was patterns of light in the high Swiss Alps that would make mandala-like shapes that were seen physically when people were in a specific spot. And this is what came out in the debriefings. There were also spheres coming down, one of which was filmed. This is Dr. Rosalia Codogni. She's a medical emergency doctor. So she describes one of the spheres that came down. There were many members of the group that saw the spheres coming down other side of the group where we did the protocols. She also got the pulsing mandala systems. Others were seeing zigzaggers, but objects between lines of light, particularly in the area of Vega and Cygnus in this dialogues. Others would see red lights with red beams in between and in different phases. Now, Dr. Kodagni also wrote down immediately all of the patterns that she was observing and put them together. And it appears to be a cipher, which we're working on. So a bit like Morse code, except that there are more lines to the ovoids as the zeros. That's one form of signal intelligence. What it is, what it concludes, we don't know. We did introduce the concept there of the canvas, of the environment, and the artist of consciousness. Now, I talked in Pescara earlier this year with Professor Korotkov about our dialogues work and the possibility of using some of his new technology. This is him today in the field, which we could, in fact, do. Korotkov is very well known for the biowell technology in medicine. Konstantin Korotkov, professor of computer science and biophysics at St. Petersburg University of Informational Technology, Mechanics, and Optics in Russia, and other faculties. Has published over 400 papers in leading journals on physics and biology, holds 15 patents on biophysics inventions, author of 12 books in many European languages, including electrophotonic analysis in medicine. Well, the ambient sensor, called the Sputnik, he's Russian, so, uses the biowell, which measures the electrophotonic systems of a specific object. Sputnik, a biowell Sputnik sensor is an attachment for the biowell device designated for measurements of the electrical capacity of the space around the Sputnik. it can be used for evaluation of the auspicity of the environment and for relative studies of various effects on the environment. BioWell device is an impulse analyzer device that is able to extract electrophotonic emission from the conductive object placed on its electrode, capture the resulting gas discharge created by excitation of air molecules by the electrophotonic emission, and send the created glow images to the computer via USB cable. So he said, well, actually, this has never been used in field work. It's always been done for small case analysis, like graveyards, churches, sacred sites, etc., sacred architecture. Never in the wild. So in the high Swiss Alps, we had a triangulation of Sputniks with biowells to 3 max. This is the triangulation where the group did the protocol. And what is interesting is the results. Here I'm showing the results in the debriefings. Luckily, Kudai Enrico, my translator, but also the Italian representative of Professor Korotkov with BioWell, marked whenever there was a UFO sighting or an anomaly in the sky that was visible to anyone who would look at it. This helps a lot because there's a lot of data. So when we engaged the protocol, there were marked changes. In one particular area here, the group begins the protocol, coherent protocol that's been trained by biofeedback and is engaged and harnessed with breath work, which increases the intensity of the somatic system. So there's a clear peak that goes up, and then we stop, and then we start focusing onto the summation of the UFO. That he found particularly interesting. Professor Korotkov, that is. With the sightings, numerous changes as an object appears. In one occasion, an object creates a fall in the emissions. Something interesting happened at that time, exactly at that time, in the background radiation. I'll show you that in a moment. And here it peaks again, and this one peaks quite significantly, as you can see. This is completely new. It's never been done before, let alone in the wilderness, even more so in terms of dialogues with UFOs. So this is the future. The Sputnik is going to GPS, environmental measurements, systems, hooked left, right, and center to all information data into one. So these can happen concurrently. This is briefly reporting on this new research. Here you can see the clear spike as the unidentified aerial phenomena appears over the group. At the 3:30 a.m. point, we have a spike in background radiation. Comparison before we began, the average CPM background radiation went from 5 to 100, maybe 120 at most. During this period, the CPM went up to 347 at 3:33 a.m. between two manifestations. So there is some background radiation correlation to that spike, which is interesting. They were sold out, but next time we trust to have a scintilla telescope which measures matter and antimatter. So this was published, apparent detection via new telescopes with concave lenses, not convex, of otherwise invisible terrestrial entities, as Dr. Ruggiero Santilli has called them. These telescopes were used in hadronic astronomy to detect antimatter galaxies, antimatter asteroids, and other objects. Now, for years, very popular. The surprise came when it was aimed at the environment. In the environment, the telescope, there is a Galilei telescope that shows the normal environment, and there is the ISO telescope that takes the convex and the concave together. The ISO unit in hadronic mechanics is a brand new field of mathematics. The isotopic plane is you've got 1, and 3 is just 3 ones, 9 is 9 ones. So you've got 1 to every other 1. That's one form of looking at the ISO unit. The ISO unit in geometry is you take a triangle and put it 180 degrees to another triangle. That's the first ISO. But it has an isoself dual interlocked with it. That's the ISO unit of basic isotopic physics that is lifting all forms of mathematics and unifies all previous forms of mathematics. It's a genius stroke that's extraordinary. Not only that, genotopic plane was introduced by Rogero Santilli, which proves the holographic universe. Dr. Chris Illett needed to use this to be able to model conch shell morphologies in the computer, because Euclidean mathematics caused the conch shell morphologies to crumble. And this was published in the Biological Sciences in 1990. It required 6 arrows of time to model, and that required the genotopic plane, time travel, biological time travel. You've got a cube in the past, backwards and forwards time. You've got a cube in the present, backwards, forwards time. You've got a cube in the future, backwards, forwards time. Those are the 6 arrows of time required for the conch shell morphology to unfold and yet be in accordance to our Euclidean sensorial apparatus, as published in the Biological Sciences domain by Dr. Chris Illett, 1990, who in 1994, with Dr. Rogero Santilli, patented the first hadronic space-time machines based on the same new discoveries, and these have made practical technologies in fuels and in reversing radioactivity, etc. It's a big story. So these ISO telescopes, Santilli telescopes, were detecting different types of objects invisible to the Galileo telescope. Some were pure antimatter, but that does not make sense, because if you take the Tunguska theory in Russia, that was an antimatter reaction causing a big explosion. Bring matter into antimatter, boom. Here you have antimatter spheres moving around intelligently, and many astronomers, hadronic astronomers, are observing these, going over technical facilities in the US, which is maybe a bit alarming for some, and moving intelligently, but not creating any explosion. Another form of these objects is isomatter, partly matter and antimatter. Now that's extremely advanced. They're being intelligently maneuvered. They're partly antimatter and they're partly matter, but they're visible with the Santilli ISO telescope. The technology to get us to engineer a matter that is both matter and antimatter and doesn't create reactions is perhaps 500 years away. So this is a matter light and antimatter light, the concave to the convex lens. At the moment, they're sold out on Amazon. This is how they look like. Different types of objects, dark objects and light objects, based on matter or isomatter. What we want to do in dialogues is we have the Santilli telescopes, we have the Dr. Korotkov devices, and we want to correlate that with quality normal cameras as well. So when an object appears, and an unknown appears, in accordance to protocol, is it seen before in antimatter? Is it seen in isomatter before it becomes materially decoupled into the visible range? This is an area we want to explore, and I think is very exciting, based on these published findings. Some of them move very, very fast indeed. Those were the Santilli telescopes. Protocol. The 8 Hertz cycle is fundamental to the protocol. This is Dr. Andrea Puharish, magnetic model of matter and mind, physical foundation of information action transfer in the healing process. So, stack of documents not on the internet, which we got in 1990. 8 Hertz is the phase velocity difference between the velocities of the orbits of the proton versus the electron. 90% of the universe is hydrogen. In every cubic centimeter of the universe are hydrogen atoms, which have an 8 Hertz resonance. So this is a C tone, so it's a fundamental musical tone that we don't hear, but it's in every cubic centimeter of the universe, and it is 92% of the atoms of our body. The DNA also replicates at a cycle of 8 cycles per second, 250 times roughly in a second in a DNA molecule, in 32 trillion cells. So the whole universe has a musical foundation of this synchronization of the brain hemispheres, of the most creative states. 8 Hertz sets up 16 Hertz in the observations of Dr. Puharish, 32 Hertz, 64 Hertz, 128 Hertz, 256 Hertz, 512 Hertz. And he found that by the electrolysis of water for 72 hours at 8 Hertz, water has a dielectric resonance of 8 Hertz, that it reaches a peak of 512 Hertz. At 512 Hertz, a whole musical system emerges of harmonic frequencies of 16 Hertz difference each, 360 Hertz to 720 Hertz. So the 432 Hertz is the A, for example, is in that sequence. 512 Hertz also started to produce life. Amino acids started to form in sterile water. This is all based on 8. So you could say this is, we call this universal tempering, that 8 Hertz is the foundation of the architecture of the universe. But also, every dendrite of the brain is utilized or connected when we are in an 8 Hertz alpha state. When we're in a beta rhythm state, chit-chat, espresso, we're only in some dendrites of the brain in separation. So this is also a form of superconsciousness. That's what Einstein imaging shows. All 8 poles of the brain linked at 8 Hertz. Basically, the brain becomes one with a universal brain. But the heart, in compassion, as we will show in a moment, also peaks at 8 Hertz as it produces the golden proportion in the cardio rhythm. I have to skip over these quickly. So the universal heart-mind, that's what a universal intelligence will utilize. This was the electrolysis of water from the hydrogen atoms, 8 Hertz, 8 Hertz, 8 Hertz, by Puharish, which then produced primitive life in sterile water. This was repeated many times. Over years. The research of the HeartMath Institute, Dr. Glenn Ryan and Dr. McCraty, back in the early 90s, they were researching compassionate cardio, the effect of compassion on cardio rhythms with the EKG or ECG, electrocardiogram. And what they found was that the heart churns out coherent waves, coherent toroidal waves in the golden proportion. However, recently, they did very interesting experiments on DNA samples. Already in the early 90s, they would have a pilot who could sustain coherence in the heart, compassionate love in the heart, philosophically, but sustained biological coherence for 2 minutes, focus on the DNA sample, which was not their DNA, was probably animal DNA, in the Petri dish. A fluorescence reading was done of that DNA sample to see how the helix was coiled. The focus of compassion and willed intent on the DNA to uncoil it had a result. The DNA uncoiled, or it coiled. But some years ago, one pilot, half a mile distance at times, would focus on the DNA sample, producing 3 separate results. A uncoiling, a coiling, and a change in the middle. This is the first time where a new force outside of electromagnetism has been detected, and it only occurs in the coherence of the heart, in biological coherence or cardio rhythms that are felt as compassion, and willed intent utilizes it. and it focuses, it peaks at 8 hertz in the early research. It's now a corporate secret, but I don't work for the Heart Math Institute. I've not made any contract with them. So I've got the early papers, which shows how their device works, which is available for anybody. It's called Inner Balance. The application is free on the iTunes Store, and you've got your electrodes which you pin on your ear, which measures your cardio rhythm. The software interfaces and gives you a breathing sequence, and you get to see a beat per minute cycle of your heartbeat, which goes to about 72 BPM, which is the circadian pulse. And you go into coherent states. The coherent states is the green area. And so the more you maintain your coherence, the higher you'll go up into the green. And this is the only state, the control states of joy or of intellectualism, focusing on a DNA sample, no results. Only biological coherence with willed intent produced a genetic programming, a changing of the DNA. This is suddenly where consciousness interfaces with the DNA. We find it very curious that 8 hertz also occurs before the UFO manifests at Hessdalen, according to Dr. Erling Strand. So the UFO, consciousness, and the heart and genetic engineering are one package. This is a growing up. Other details. So this is one of the early graphs. You see the heart electrocardiogram peak at 8 cycles per second. Even more astonishing for researchers at the time, the forehead electrodes measured an entrainment in the brain of 8 cycles per second, the most significant brain state there is. Dr. Carl Bribram from holographic brain modeling couldn't believe it. He had to take the equipment apart because that was impossible, that the heart could entrain the brain in the most significant alpha synchronization state. There is also some change at the belly. The most important thing is that the harmonic intervals that are produced by the cardiorhythm in compassion is the golden proportion. A golden proportion is a cascade that goes mirror to mirror to mirror to mirror, infinitely. It is transient to the universe. It goes on forever. It's life after death, it's life before death. It cascades forever. And it entrains the golden proportion also at the belly and the waves, the toroidal waves, from the brain. So golden lasers. Within the tree, where you have an extremely low frequency coil, also the golden proportion, not peaking at 8 hertz, but it is the golden proportion. So these are very significant forms of the foundation of the inner balance application and the science thereof. We are built out of the golden mean. The galaxy is built out of the golden mean. But the peak is 8 hertz. So 8 hertz is clearly the biological coherence required in engaging the foundation of the universal intelligence. As every cubic centimeter of the universe are hydrogen atoms which have a resonance of 8 cycles per second, this becomes quite logical. There's a lot of information that has to go with that. Dr. Puharich measured Gila's hands, and I go on with this slideshow, measured Gila's hands of different varieties, different traditions, Catholic, Huna, etc., African, and found, excuse me, too fast, found that they were releasing approximately 8 cycles per second, and the water would be entrained for months with an 8 hertz signature. So it's also healing. He treated over 27 organic diseases with an 8 hertz device that pulsed a single E note of 8 cycles per second, producing the binomial sequence, 16, 32, 64 hertz, etc. And over 2 years, the studies were done. Several thousand people wore the device. 27 organic diseases were reversed. So it's universal tempering. He also found that the 8 cycles per second passed through a Faraday cage in the 1950s. First, it was a single Faraday cage, copper, vacuum, copper. Nothing is supposed to go through the Faraday cage if it's electromagnetic. But 8 hertz passed straight through. He continued with double Faradays and then triple Faradays. It went straight through. So that means 8 cycles has to orthorotate 180 degrees, 90 and 90, through non-locality, like Bell non-locality, virtuality, past, present, and future, and then rotate back to linearity. So it acts like an interdimensional bridge, a little bit like the owls of Mike, in a sense. People in the Faraday cage, saturated with negative ions, would also have an increased ability in psi scores, that's remote viewing, numbers or drawings, in another room or even in another lab, as they were shielded from linear electromagnetics, and the negative ions together with the shielding enabled their psi abilities, their 8 cycles amplification to occur. This is one of the early double Faraday cage labs in Glen Cove, Maine, 1952. This was done over several decades of research. 8 hertz also passed straight through a superconductor. Super cool superconductor. And Dr. Luc Montagnier did a teleportation of DNA at 7 hertz. He would have sterile water in one container, and he would have a bacterial DNA in the other, surrounding them both with a 7 hertz field in the sterile water. The bacterial DNA was teleported. His work has been used by the HeartMath Institute to start to teleport stem cells into the Petri dish DNA sample. Last word is they were successful. So anthropizations, that is clear willed intent with biological coherence, changing the DNA, mankind waking up as genetic engineers of themselves, and teleporting stem cells, that means regeneration. And the UFO comes directly into correlation at Hess-Dahlen. So the Hess-Dahlen phenomena, measured by scientists from many, many different countries since the 1980s, suddenly there is a plasma vehicle that appears. The plasma vehicle becomes solid. It will travel at a fast rate, 30,000 kilometers. A spectrum analysis is done as the object goes 30,000 kilometers an hour, turns 90 degrees, 30,000 kilometers an hour, which is pretty much impossible. The spectrum analysis shows the rare earth element scandium, which in fact occurs in the mines, former Nazi mines, of Hess-Dahlen, Norway, underneath Trondheim. So we decided to engage the protocol there. We would utilize the webcam, and we went there hundreds of times. No protocol, absolutely nothing appeared. 2 times, we utilized the protocol, and immediately the phenomena, as is well recorded and databased by the Hess-Dahlen Research Association and the Hess-Dahlen Project in Norway, the phenomena appears. 2 times. Eight hertz was the key in that manifestation. Dr. Erling Strand stating that between 7 and 8 hertz would regularly be picked up just before the manifestation of the Hess-Dahlen light phenomenon. So the art of cosmic contact involves more than just some superior intelligence. It's more like there is a cosmic intelligence, but this is not a conclusion. It is more like, we say, it's not a given, that there's clearly some form of cosmic intelligence that also wants to synergize with who and what we are, the best of humanity. And the best of humanity is art and culture. So as the creators of the instigators of the 432 hertz and 8 hertz music, popular music movement, the classical world has done that since Verdi, 100 years or so further back. But in the popular electronic music, 432 hertz, 432 hertz has been shown in clinical studies to ameliorize psychiatric disorders when listened to as classical music for 18 months. The 432 hertz music system with 8 hertz utilized in all forms possible. The arpeggators oscillate at 8 hertz, low frequency oscillations in our synthesizers, 8 hertz, the panning of the drums, 8 hertz. We put it at every level possible. Concerts, cultural concerts, which are linked together with the same circadian tempos, 72 BPM or 144 BPM if you want to dance. If you want to go psytrance, 288 BPM. We just did it. We demonstrated it in the Ozora Music Festival. And it works. These are harmonics of the heart at the moment of love in the drum beat, 8 hertz and 432 hertz. One creates a cascade of cultural concerts linked together through the internet, bringing out the most and greatest coherence, biological coherence, and taking antennas by Dr. Andrew Weisbaum in Switzerland, which absorb the ambience of the audience, the body music. You put it into the software Mathematica, put in a phi filter, so only the golden proportion and binomial sequence is taken, and then you mix that back into the channel. So you've got the audience being amplified and remembering their coherence, their biological coherence, and dancing with that and starting to become cognizant of coherence. And then you mix in the best part of the audience's body, the coherence, so you're interacting with that. Then you link concert to concert to concert, from country to country to country, and you've got a global song for engaging cultural, musical contact with the cosmos. We've had the scientists with SETI do it through radio astronomy. But what is the greatest goal of humanity? It's our creativity, it's our art, it's our culture, it's our music. So we suggest that this is a future for mankind. The whole layout of modern music, you have the Beatles coming in a dream of John Lennon. There is a UFO which turns into the pie in the sky, which turns into a beetle. And out comes a beam and a spaceman and says, "You shall be called the Beatles." The testimonies about Elvis Presley and UFOs, so-called king of rock, it goes on and on. It's a big story. So it's as if popular modern music has already embedded in this cultural event that is to emerge, where we use the best we can, the best of musicology, the best scientific pitch. 432 hertz was called scientific pitch. It was the best pitch that scientists could come up with. The C note based on 8 hertz going to 512 hertz, A is 432, and it engages 8 hertz. 8 hertz is the gate and is the art of the consciousness artist for cosmic contact, is our suggestion of the future of this research, with ever more chartering of the physical parameters as part of the dance. Thank you. Thank you, Jan. Fantastic. Fantastic work.